You're listening to Estrogen Dropouts.
Welcome back to Estrogen Dropouts. I'm one of your hosts, Elizabeth.
And I'm your other host, Erin. And today we are joined by a special guest, Mary Locke, who happens to be one of my favorite people. She's a good friend, but also she is my business partner in our conscious business, Heart-Led Retreats. And we also have a holistic health coaching business called Triad Wellness. I'll link to those in the show notes so that you can find them if you want to follow us. Mary is a nurse practitioner as well as a Reiki master, and she currently works in a ketamine infusion clinic. And so today we are going to be talking about psychedelics in midlife.
And funny enough, just for research purposes only, Erin and I had our own psychedelic experience a couple of weeks ago, and we're going to be sharing that at the end. So stay tuned. It was our first ever trip.
Yes, exactly. Our first ever experience. I mean, I think if anyone who's listened to the podcast long enough knows, I don't even drink alcohol. And so, and I've never done any kind of psychedelics. And that's one of the things that I want to really quickly clear up is that there are a lot of myths about psychedelics. And I was telling the ladies before we started recording that my oldest son has done them, and this is years ago, and I was like, don't do those. Like, I was so against, thinking it was like a party drug. And that's the first myth, is that I think a lot of people think of, when they think of psychedelics, they think that, people are doing them just for fun. And actually, a lot of indigenous cultures have used psilocybin and ayahuasca and other psychedelics like peyote, is that how you say it? I always say it wrong, for centuries, and not just to get high. They use it for deep healing and spiritual insight. And a lot of times people think that psychedelics can cause brain damage. And studies have shown that the complete opposite, and Mary's going to address that, the potential therapeutic benefits of these psychedelics, the different properties in them. And then a lot of times people think like, oh, well, like I had a friend who took acid and he had a bad trip and he's never been the same. And while psychedelics can, if you have underlying mental health issues, like if you are potentially schizophrenic or maybe bipolar, if you haven't been screened properly, then you might end up having a negative side effect. But usually with psychedelics, the risks are very low. And then a lot of times people think like, well, they're addictive. Psychedelics are not addictive. They don't hijack your dopamine system. So they don't make you want more, crave more. It's not like, oh, I got to do more mushrooms. Elizabeth and I we have not turned into mushroom addicts, have we, Elizabeth?
No, not at all.
Not yet. And then a lot of times people are worried about the legalities, and it's actually changing pretty fast, that landscape. A lot of places have made them legal, or even in a therapeutic setting, they are legal. And that another common myth is that you'll lose control, that you end up being out of your mind. And actually, it's funny because when we did them, we had a babysitter, my husband, Jeff, and he said, because Elizabeth and I wanted to do them early enough in the day, just so in case, because we've never done them. And he was like, oh, I don't want to have to tell people I'm on a call and like, I got to go. My wife and her friend are chasing butterflies.
That didn't happen.
You don't feel out of control. So those are some of the myths. I just wanted to quickly address that because I know that a lot of you listening are probably like, have Erin and Elizabeth lost their mind? Like, what are they promoting, drug use?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I felt all of those feelings that it was like toxic drugs, bad trippy experiences. Your brain will get fried. You'll never come back. Like, I thought all of those things until I've been listening to podcasts now for a long time on it. And there's even like documentaries on them. And then when I heard you were partnering with Mary, and I was like, learned all about Mary, I was like, okay, maybe we should give this a shot. So Mary, why don't you kick us off and tell us what are the most mainstream common types of psychedelics and how are they used?
Well, great. I am so thankful to be here and to talk about one of my favorite topics. It's just fascinating what the psychedelics can do. And it is an exciting time because I feel like we're definitely at the precipice where, the tides are shifting and we have access to more knowledge. And so the stigma is starting to minimize once we have more education on what these potentially can do for us and some of the risks. But yeah, I would say the psilocybin, which the other word known as the magic mushrooms, are pretty common, and it's not quite legal, but it is decriminalized in a few states. One of being like Colorado is one, so it's exciting. Like you can grow, and you have to be 21 and older to do that, and then you can use it at your own discretion. And I would imagine that they would start having some therapeutic places for psilocybin if they don't have it already. Those will probably start popping up soon, so that's exciting. There is ketamine, of course, which is legal. It is not necessarily under the category of psychedelic. It's considered a dissociative anesthetic, but it definitely has some psychedelic qualities, which can be, it changes like thought processes. It kind of gives you distance from your default mode network, which is that some people describe it as like the ego part of yourself or the me part. So it kind of separates you from that part of yourself, which a lot of the other psychedelics do too, which can help gain some insights when you are not as like tightly wound to your daily patterns. And then it also has like hallucinogenic properties and some possible like auditory hallucinogenic properties as well for some people. And then there's
Wait,
those
did you
are the
just say
two.
audible?
Sometimes people get auditory. I think those are less common, but it can happen. Yeah, I don't hear that as frequent, but sometimes with like psychedelics, that can be something that can occur. And let's see, some other common ones.
What
There's
about is it called ibogaine? Or how do you say it?
ibogaine. So that's really exciting too, because Texas just recently passed like $50 million of their state funding to participate in research, which is for addiction, traumatic brain injuries like the CTEs, PTSD. So that's huge. I mean, a lot of the reason why there's such a lag with having these available and like because how we have our scheduling with the legalities, they're considered mushrooms, ibogaine, are like ayahuasca, like all of them are scheduled 1, which means that it's filed under the fact that there's no medicinal properties to these medicines and there's high addiction potential with these medicines, which obviously is a lie. That's not true. So it will be so nice once they have all the research, because I would imagine that the FDA would have to start changing how they schedule these. So, and also Mississippi is holding a hearing potentially to be able to pass a law to have state funding for Mississippi for ibogaine as well.
So when you say
that's huge.
That's a lie that it's not addictive, and that's not true. Like, is that based in science or is that based in experience? I mean, or like how
That's 100%
like a
like
listener
science.
will
We
be
know
like,
that mushrooms
how
are
do you
not
know?
addictive. It has no physical addiction qualities, and that's based on the research that we have. Ibogaine is definitely not one. I don't know, have you ever heard of anyone using ibogaine as like a party drug ever? I have not. It's not something that you can use recreationally. So that's one of like the big daddy ones that really has a huge transformational potential. So it's really great to have these options for people who have PTSD and have these traumatic brain injuries, because it has a neuroplasticity, and the changes that occur with ibogaine have like such a long-lasting result where it's like months of really seeing these changes. Ketamine does have some addiction potentials. I would say it's less likely with like IM and IV. There is like a nasal spray and a troche, something that you put in your cheek to absorb it. And those I think the nasal spray in particular, like if you get it sent to your house and you have the nasal spray, and ketamine can be used for the treatment-resistant depression, those who have suicidal ideation, which are having thoughts of suicide, not necessarily a plan, but thoughts of suicide, and then anxiety, chronic pain, So if you're at home and you have a medicine and, it gives you a little bit of relief, then it wears off. And then sometimes the things can start coming up again. So like, why wouldn't you, dose yourself again? So the
Right.
fact that you have it available at home and you can get relief, it's more of a psychological dependency more than it doesn't have the physical dependency. So if we can compare it to something like pot, we know that pot doesn't have that physical dependency, but it has more of that psychological impact. But used in a therapeutic setting with like IV and IM injections in a clinic has a lower risk of.
For people that have never heard of a ketamine clinic, because I hadn't heard of it before. So you go there and you treat people with ketamine. There you oversee it through IV. So there's no chance of somebody getting addicted.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a chance for anything, but there's a way lower risk for the addictive potential when you're going in for a clinic for the IV infusion and the IM. But I think it's, based on what I've learned, it's more of a potential with the at-home versions because you can dose yourself with it, and it's just the habitual impact of it. But
Can I say something really quick? I think
yeah, sure.
that's the important distinction is that it's a psychological addiction, whereas with alcohol and nicotine, those are not just psychological addictions, but they also have very high physical addictions. I mean, when you are drinking regularly, if you stop suddenly, you can die from the withdrawal. And with nicotine,
Right.
people that go through nicotine withdrawal, it's a very strong physical craving. So it's more
So
because
it's a physical dependency, and
right.
alcohol, I mean, obviously isn't even on the schedule of drugs, and alcohol is a drug. And not to like shame people, I drink on occasion, but it's just the point I want to highlight is how much our society influence is our perception of things. And so, of course, a lot of the messaging that we received about these drugs or medicines back in the Reagan era was like, don't do drugs, they're bad. I mean, that was a promotion of things that weren't true. And I'm not sure how they got it under a Schedule 1, but it's wrong. And the fact that we do have alcohol as a socially acceptable drug, which has a high potential for addiction and harm. It's like one of the most toxic things for your body and nervous system. And it's one of the few ones when you are detoxing, if you're addicted to it, you can die if you just suddenly abruptly stop it. So it's just goes to show you how much our culture can place perceptions on how we act and respond. And so I think that's important to know. And it's really exciting because I think that's starting to change.
Well, and I think that you're right, that so much of it was, and I think even before Reagan, some of the things that were, classified the way they were classified by schedules from the law perspective is a lot of that has to do with the fact that they can't tax things. So it really boils down to like money. It's like, how do you
Well, if they made it legal, they could tax it. And so states are benefiting from the THC approval. So
right. That's why a lot of states have gotten on board with THC, and you can go to a dispensary and buy it and then they can tax it. Whereas when before it was legal to procure it legally, you would grow it yourself. And so the government is only going to allow something, and not to go on a rant about the government, but just it usually is not so much for protection of our nation or our
sure, there's the
citizens.
financial
It's the financial aspect, right?
So obviously, yeah. And it just, I mean, I think THC is a great example too. Like, we definitely need more research. And so I think what's inhibited that is the scheduling of these medicines. And that's why we don't have enough research. But I think that's going to shift. That is exciting to see, that potentially.
So now that we've talked a bit about the different types of psychedelics, I want to talk to you about the potential benefits. And I mean, I know because I've been tapped in the last couple of years. I can remember several years ago listening to a podcast, very, prominent podcast. and he was interviewing somebody who's a biohacker, and he has had treatment resistant depression his whole life. And he's tried all of the mainstream, SSRIs, all those different kind of drugs. And what he found works best for him is every 6 months he does like a pretty large dose of psilocybin, and it kind of resets him. It resets his baseline of his emotional, his emotional bandwidth, or whatever you want to call it. Like, so if his mood is normally really low, he knows after about 5-6 months, he starts getting down into that depression. He does a big dose, just a one time, and then he reaps the benefits for like 6 months. So talk to us about the therapeutic benefits. Like, what is the mechanism behind the results that people are seeing with these psychedelics?
Well, yeah, we know that psilocybin works on a lot of different areas of the brain. I mean, one of them that I mentioned was the default mode network. So it
Right.
separates you from that. So it, can connect you to this like wider aspect. And so being able to separate sometimes gives you insights on yourself. It also has anti-inflammatory properties too. They've been able to see that it decreases these inflammatory markers. One being CRP, which is C-reactive protein, which is a nonspecific inflammatory marker. And so it's been measured that just with microdosing, after 7 days, they can see these inflammatory markers decreasing. It can increase blood flow to the brain. It, enhances that neuroplasticity, which, helps make more connections with, new neural connections within the brain. And so when we can have that, we have access to more of our abilities, and it can improve memory and mood. And yeah, so there's like so many amazing things. There's this really interesting article that just came out on psilocybin this year that was really fascinating about, it was kind of, I hate the word anti-aging because we all are going to age at some point, but it was aging healthy, I suppose, was about the study. And they found they did a couple different things. One of the first thing they started with psilocybin, and when we have psilocybin in the body, it metabolizes into psilocin. And so they took that component and tested human cells, so they did lung and skin, and they found that it prolonged the lifespan of these cells by 50%, which was pretty fascinating. And then they took it a step further and did it in mice, and found so that they used like aging mice. So they was like equivalent to like a human 60 or 65 years old, and they had a group that they treated with psilocybin and a group that they didn't treat. And they found that the group with the psilocybin lasted like 80, their survival rate was 80%, and the untreated group was 50%. So it's a 30% improvement with the psilocybin. And not only did they live longer, but they aged healthier with more vibrant fur and less white hairs. So their conclusion was that telomeres, which are like the cap, the end of chromosomes, which is a sign, we want like longer telomeres. It's a sign of youth pretty much with our cells. As we get older, these telomeres start to shorten after like each cellular kind of change, they shorten. And so the thought was that it extended the length of the telomeres, and also the cytokines, which is an inflammatory marker, was diminished. So those were kind of the components. So obviously more research is needed to like translate this to humans and like have any kind of recommendation. There's still a lot of gaps in knowledge, but that was
I can see how this would be really great for women or just people in midlife who need a reset to kind of get out of any destructive patterns that maybe they're in, whether it be like destructive thought patterns or I don't know. What do you think some ways that women in midlife might consider using this?
I mean, especially like, midlife, oftentimes people have like their midlife crisis is what they talk about, which I think is just a time where, you kind of can see the end a little bit clearer. You've lived long enough, so you're starting to contemplate, like, is this the life I've been wanting to live? Is this my parents' dream? Is this my society's dream? You're kind of questioning things. And then you can see, like, I only have so many years left. and maybe your health is like starting to affect you. Typically, you've lived long enough where you've had someone that you've loved die, or you have aging parents. So yeah, it's a time of like questioning things. And I think that it's a great opportunity for something like psychedelics to help draw you inward, and it gives you access to more of that internal landscape and really helps like access those subconscious parts of yourself. So, I've heard some people like will have an ayahuasca experience and they'll have these big revelations afterwards, like, ayahuasca told me to divorce my husband or quit my job, or, they'll, come out saying that. And anytime you do like a big ceremony, they'll always advise you, like, don't go, change your life, like, let the dust settle. It's not so much that the medicine is telling you to do that, but it's that you're accessing these other parts of yourself. And so it's usually just learning, like, that's a part of yourself that's coming to that revelation and that understanding and that truth that something is, that you're not happy in your relationship or you're not happy in your job, and that something needs to change. You may not necessarily need to divorce that person, but you may need to change the dynamics that are at play. And so I think it's really powerful to like expedite that process and kind of get to the underpinnings of like kind of what's driving you and what's motivating you. And I think that's how it can be really powerful.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I think that you had those thoughts already of quitting your job or divorcing your spouse, but you've kept it down because it's not socially acceptable. Or how will I do this? Or it's going to upset the apple cart and everybody's going to be upset with me if I do that. And so when you're kind of, like you said, removed from your default mode network, where you're not just in the same pattern, you're able to see more clearly. And that things that you've been stuffing down are able to come forward. And that's why I think in midlife, especially, because if we've been mothers and just taking care of children for 20 years, taking care of the home, taking care of everything, even if we're working, and we have a job as well on top of that. And then it's like, for Elizabeth and I being empty nesters, it's now all of a sudden, all of the noise that was around us has quieted, and we're able to like look at like, even before we, even without a psychedelic experience, like, so imagine even having a psychedelic experience and even quieting that external noise even more, allowing you to really get into like deep introspection, right?
Yeah. And I do think it also, like, something about it helps bring up suppressed emotions. So it helps like emotional processing. And so that can be kind of like a weight lifted if you're able to kind of access those suppressed feelings and feel them and have them release. I think that can be helpful, like, all the way around as well.
And also, like you were talking about neuroplasticity, so even from a physical, like a aging well standpoint, is that the potential of neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, brain growth, is really attractive, because I know I get an MRI every year for my MS. And, even though my MRI hasn't had a lot of changes as far as my MS goes over the last 25 years, but your brain shrinks every year. And it's really kind of like, you're like, I don't want my brain getting smaller. I want it to like be robust and healthy. And especially for women, because we do account for, 2/3 of neurological, conditions like Alzheimer's, dementia. I'm wondering if they're going to, as they do more and more research, if they start to find that there is a benefit on, potentially keeping the neurological conditions at bay.
Right. So, yeah, I definitely think that that's a potential, that the preliminary research is really promising. And like, if you think about what estrogen is doing and how it's a neuroprotective kind of mechanism that's happening, and when it drops, you get all the symptoms of like brain fog and mood fluctuation. So there was some suggestions based on kind of like what research we have on psilocybin, that potentially for those people who aren't candidates for hormone replacement therapy, that this could maybe be a possible option for those, the group that can't have hormone replacement therapy,
So would
because
that be on like a
it does.
microdose level?
Yeah, so it was suggested that like a microdose level could, because it can increase blood flow to the brain. It improves like the BDNF, which is the brain-derived nootropic factor, which helps grow your brain and helps with the neuroplasticity. And so it
And
improves
on a
that.
microdose, for anyone listening, just so you know, microdosing, you're not going to have any crazy effects. Like you won't feel anything that day, right? Like you just take it you take a little bit
Yeah, I
every
mean,
day
you want
or a few
to,
times a
sometimes
week.
you can feel like a subtle shift, and I think that's okay. Obviously, yeah, it shouldn't be interfering with any of your daily activities, and oftentimes you won't notice anything at all, and it'll still have those positive benefits. And then it also, like, even at the microdosing, has the decreased inflammatory things, which we know that when your estrogen drops, you have this more of a inflammatory response. So it's interesting. Obviously, more research needs to be done to be able to recommend that to women.
Well, before we share our experience, talk to us briefly about set and setting and how this is like to kind of help break that stigma of it being like a party drug. It's not like mommy wine o'clock or whatever. You're not like, just sitting
You're not
around.
popping some.
So, I mean, I definitely think that, it matters how you prepare for it. Like, what's the intention? What are you wanting to change? I think preparing in that way is really important because it can help navigate it. I mean, you can take these medicines and they may give you a little bit of boost and help, but nothing's going to change in your life if you don't also meet the medicine halfway and kind of take the steps to do it. So it's an opportunity to kind of get out of your old patterning because it kind of helps clean the slate of these old like embedded pathways, and it helps reorganize the brain. And so you can, if you're wanting to make changes, it's easier to instill these new thoughts. The idea is that what are you wanting to program yourself with? How do you want to reprogram yourself? And so you want to, use that opportunity where you have the neuroplasticity to be able to do that. And it's easier to do it. The medicine will help you do it. And then it's easier to have it stick.
So there's a fluidity by using it. The rigidity that you normally have is kind of loosened.
Yeah, and I did want to mention, okay, I really like this one ketamine study. I really is so fascinating and highlights just how great that ketamine can work, and also like what's going on with the brain. I think we don't know exactly, like with psychiatric conditions, what the exact cause is. They think, oh, there's some obviously neurotransmitters at play because these other medicines help to a certain point, but obviously it just kind of feels like a Band-Aid sometimes with some of the medicines that are prescribed, which, is a great option for some people, but sometimes it's just not enough. And with ketamine, there was this one study that used mice again. Sorry for all our animal lovers out there, but I do like animals, so but it's really great info. So they scanned the brains of these mice, and then they elicited a certain trauma that was kind of similar to abuse or neglect in humans. And then they could see kind of like some depressive behaviors with the mice after they did that. And they scanned the brains again and noticed that the dendritic spines, which are on the ends of the brain, like neuron cells that help, they're like little spindles that help communication between the cells, that they had like been wiped out. And so it just goes to show that the brain was damaged because of the trauma, like it's brain damage. And then they gave the mice one dose of ketamine, and like within a matter of hours, they saw that the behavior of the mice improved. And when they re-scanned, they could see like the dendritic spines that had been wiped out had gotten restored. So it was like fascinating how it was like such an immediate shift with how it worked, and that it's a brain trauma. I think when we have these impacts with stress and trauma and life, and we can be doing all of the healthy things which we certainly want to incorporate, but sometimes it's challenging when you are like raising a family, going to work, that you're just doing like the things you have to do to survive, and then to add on like meditation and exercise and eating healthy. All of that can just be like too much for some people. So I think it's great that we have these options that can really help be a catalyst to have the opportunity to add on and, with like a therapist or an integration coach, and then, making these little lifestyle changes along the way is where the magic happens. And so that's really important. And then as
It's
far as like the
fascinating to hear you say that stress, it causes trauma to the brain. It causes a level of brain damage in a sense. I mean, not to the extreme
yeah,
of
it
some,
does.
but it does. It harms stress, repeated stress and emotional trauma damages your brain.
Yes. So, I mean, the fact that you say it's all in your head, it's an organ issue too. It's not just like a psychological issue. Our mind and bodies are deeply interwoven and connected. And there's so much research to support that. I think that that can still sometimes be a myth, but it goes both ways. And so some people can be at a genetic predisposition where they are more likely to have a harder time based on their genetic predisposition as well. And so I think just it's important to kind of like the de-shaming, I think is such an important piece too, because as we know, there's been a lot of stigma and shame just around mental health. I think that's shifting a lot, but also with like medicine use and drug use. Usually people are using drugs because they've had trauma or they're trying to treat their pain. And so I think it just kind of puts people in these perpetual cycles because of how we perceive it and how they perceive themselves, because it has been ingrained in us that, yeah, drugs are bad and blah, blah, blah. But a lot of times, I think it's just a symptom of the underlying problem is, there's been damage to the body and people are just doing the best that they can with the resources.
Coping. I mean, they're just trying to cope and get through the day. And, I think you're right. It's like so often, nobody as a little child grows up and is like, I want to be a drug addict or an alcoholic. It's usually because they've had neglect, abuse, whether it's emotional or physical. And so it's, they're self-medicating to help themselves be able to cope. So Elizabeth, let's talk about our experience. We went under the advice of Mary because her background, she helped me figure out how to get it and everything, which you don't technically buy it. You go on like these different websites and then you make a donation to it's like a nonprofit.
Yeah, I didn't supply.
Yeah, you're not dealing it. You just were like, here's places you can get it. And so Elizabeth, do you want to share your experience?
Yeah, so I've always really wanted to do peyote, and I always wanted to do it like in a teepee in New Mexico with some Native American on a reservation. Chris has always thought I was nuts, but I'm always like, I want to do that. I have a friend that did it, and he said his soul left his body, and he was able to like turn around and see himself sitting there. And he said and all his friends in a circle, and he saw the energy cord being tied between all of them, and he saw how everyone was connected. And that just always stayed with me. I heard that story like 25 years ago, and I've always been like, I want to have that experience. So we did set our intentions, and we had very similar intentions. Mine was, I really just wanted a spiritual experience, but I wanted to receive a message that I needed to hear. I was hoping that it was going to be, I wanted to have an experience similar to him where I saw energy, that we were all love. That's what he said. He said he knew in that moment. He said and intellectually, he always kind of believed that. But to see it, like he said, it was, a different level of it. And that's really what I wanted to see. But the intention I set was just show me what I need to. We were just giggling and laughing and having like a great time. And Erin had on music that was like jungle music. Was it jungle music?
Jungle music, kind of like jungle sounds.
Jungle sounds. So, and Erin's home is there's tons of plants and greenery. And so it felt like a little jungly. Now, at one point I stepped outside onto her balcony and I just took a few moments by myself. And when I closed my eyes into a meditation out there, I did see myself as like an energy body, and then I saw two other energy bodies, if that makes sense. If you're like, what are you talking? I knew it was me, but it didn't look like me. It just looked like a form of energy that was me. And then two other energy bodies on either side of me, and they were kind of like overpowering me. Their energy was becoming one with mine. And like the message, I didn't hear anything audibly, but the just deep knowing I knew was that I need to protect my energy because I'm absorbing other people's energies. And I also felt like it wasn't like a bad thing. It was because I need to be authentic to myself. And when I'm absorbing other people's energy and taking on their things, I'm not myself. And so it's not me and it's not true. And so it was like, if you just look at it like, it's not just for my emotional well-being, which it is, but it's also like you're not being true to who you are when you do that. And I was like frustrated. I was like, this is my message. I literally sat out there. I was like, this is my message. This is so elementary. And then I kind of got this knowing like, yeah, but you're not doing it. Like you're absorbing other people's energies. And I was like, true, I am. Anyway, as soon as I got that message, I like popped up. I ran inside to Erin. I was like, oh my God, I got a message. And I was so excited. But I was terrified to do it. Honestly, I wanted to do it, but I was terrified. I really thought I was going to be like crying in the fetal position. I was thinking it was going to be terrible, like, because I have some trauma, just like we all do. And so I was like, oh my God, is all of this going to come up? And I've heard stories about people vomiting. I've heard all kinds of, I really thought I'd be seeing unicorns dance all over the room, and none of that. Erin, go ahead. You tell your experience. It was nothing like that.
And my experience, I was the same. It was hot here in Georgia, so we couldn't go out in nature. I mean, it was like 90 something degrees. So we tried to do the best with the set and the setting, and we set intentions for ourselves. Mine was the same, just show me what I need to know. And what it really drove home to me is that the only way I can explain it is that sometimes I can just be and I don't have to do. Because I am a doer, and I am a 2 on the Enneagram, which is the helper. I always like to be useful, and like it's like something to do with, and I mean, it's obviously some childhood thing, because my little sister was born 15 months after me, so maybe I always had to be the good girl, and I always had to be helpful, not because my mom made me be that way. She never was, perpetuating.
There's definitely messages that you get with our culture that was really strong.
And that's the thing, is it is. It's like the messaging that I've gotten is like, I have to be useful or helpful to be kind of worthy. And so I didn't get like a big spiritual experience, but what I thought was, because my body was so heavy, it felt like it weighed like 500 pounds. Like I was just like, I can't move. I can't do anything. I mean, I felt very alive. Like I could feel almost like energy moving through my body, but I couldn't do anything. I couldn't like be useful. So I was like, this is just a reminder that I don't have to always do. I can just be. So we
definitely did. We were both like buzzing all over. Like, like Erin's like, my feet.
But not in a bad way. I mean, not like it wasn't unsettling or anything. And like, I don't drink, I mean, I've had alcohol, certainly. It was different because like with alcohol, I'll get like that kind of warm, like toes, it goes down to your toes, and you kind of feel a little. I felt relaxed while we were doing it, and we didn't do a big hero's dose. We did kind of somewhere between.
We were very moderate.
A micro and a normal dose. So I mean, I would definitely do it again. But
it didn't feel like, I will say, because whenever I heard Mary like first say there is a potential for addiction, that freaked me out, and I was like, why did I do that? But then now that we're talking about it, I'm like,
okay, so now for psilocybin though, like there's not potential for it. It's just ketamine.
It doesn't feel addictive at all. Like I don't
need
to do it ever
I don't
again.
know any risks of, I mean, even the psychological addiction, I haven't heard that with psilocybin.
Yeah, I don't see how I didn't. Okay, that's good, because I'm like, I don't even see how.
Yeah, wait, it's with the ketamine. That's a little bit different.
Okay.
Yeah,
it didn't feel like that. It doesn't feel like, oh, like I need to do this again, or not even to relax.
It's like, it's hard to. I mean, anything has the potential for addiction. Anything does. So it just depends on like how you're going to use it. If you're like, oh, I'm going to access this part of myself and I need to do this because this is how I'm going to be, successful or whatnot, you can like, dip into it. And I guess it just depends on like the motivations behind it. And so
sugar is addicting. I mean, anything in life is addicting. I mean,
But yeah, on high, low, 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 low.
Low risk for
Yes,
addiction
very low.
with psilocybin.
And
Well,
I definitely think like if too, because it was Erin's husband Jeff was there, and he was just in case anything happened, which I think it's good to have a safe person that's sober there with you. But I do feel like at one point we had like a conversation where I was getting a little heated about something, and I felt myself snap out of it. Like I was just like reliving, not heated with Erin, with my own self. I was I was getting a little bit like, and I felt myself. So I think that if there was a house fire or something, I think adrenaline can override it. It didn't feel like I was so gone I couldn't do anything. You can still walk to the bathroom, you can still move around. Like I wouldn't drive, but it's not like you're not out of your like
Yeah.
the thoughts I had about it, like that didn't happen. It's not like an out of body experience.
the worry.
Maybe much heavier dose, but
It's like an
I don't know.
in-body experience.
Yes, you really.
Yeah.
That
It's
was
an
true. You
in-body
feel
experience.
everything
Yeah,
in
it
your
takes
body.
you deeper.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mary, for sharing your expertise with us. We definitely felt better doing it, knowing that, you have a lot of knowledge about it before we undertook it. I did want to just quickly say I have a little disclaimer for you guys that please note that this episode is not to be taken as medical advice and is intended solely as educational entertainment purposes only. Always seek the advice of a trusted medical professional before partaking in any psychedelics. So we thank you so much for tuning into today's episode.
Yeah,
Again,
thank you
thank
for
you,
having
Mary.
me. If you need, ketamine in the Roswell, Georgia area, Luna Mindful Infusions definitely is a great place.
I'll link to the website in the show notes for people, and go and find us on Estrogen Dropouts on IG and TikTok. We'll see you next week.
This has been a production of Estrogen Dropouts, LLC.